Good morning, everybody. In 1936, the Olympics were in Berlin, and Hitler and his Nazi allies hoped to use the Games to prove the superiority of the so-called Aryan race. But they were confounded when Jesse Owens, a black American, won 4 gold medals. And it was on this date, August 4, that he was awarded his medal in the long jump. Here's an aerial photograph of the Olympic Stadium in Berlin for the 1936 Games. It held about 100,000 people. The building in the foreground is the swimming venue. So Adolf Hitler liked Leni Riefenstahl. She's the gal on the right. She was a movie maker. She had done some acting and was familiar with Hollywood. And she made a propaganda movie a few years earlier called Triumph of the Will, probably the most famous propaganda movie ever. So Hitler asked her to make a propaganda movie about the Olympics. So here she is behind her camera. And she did pioneer many methods of taking pictures of sporting events that are still used today. So she was a pioneer in that regard. But the movie was also propaganda. So here's a still from that movie with the idealized version of a German athlete. So part of the point was to showcase the superiority of the so-called Aryan race. Now the movie does have regular sports reported, so here's a still from the movie of the runners coming into Berlin with the Olympic torch. And it was also on television. This is the first televised Olympics. So here's a picture of a German TV crew taking picture of the action. There was an athletes' village. Here's an aerial shot of it. It was in a suburb of Berlin. It's now been overtaken by the city as it has grown. And inside the stadium was a lot of Nazi fervor, and the Nazis wanted the Games to showcase their idea of the superiority of what they called the Aryan race. So here's Hitler on the viewing stand, and he wanted this to showcase this idea of a superior race, but here's Jesse Owens smashing that idea. So Jesse won 4 golds. He won in the 100, the 200. He was part of the 4x100 relay and the long jump, gold medals and all, which really embarrassed Hitler and the Nazis. So here we are in the medal stand. From left to right, you have Mr. Tajima from Japan, Jesse Owens in the middle, and then Lutz Long from Germany on the right, giving the Nazi salute. So you'll note that 2 of the 3 medal winners are not part of this so-called Aryan race. Yet Lutz Long, pictured here with Jesse, publicly befriended Jesse Owens, which took a lot of courage. Lutz died in World War II, and later on his son did meet Jesse Owens many years later. Well, when the war ended, Berlin was in pretty tough shape. Here's a picture of some British soldiers in the Olympic Stadium. If you look at the scoreboard, it says the winners are Truman, Churchill, and Stalin. Now, the Olympics and politics have mixed often. Here's an example from 1968 where the Czechs beat the Russians in hockey in the Winter Olympics. And then a few months later in Prague, Czechoslovakia, pictured here is the Prague Spring, where Czech civilians tried to revolt against the Russians. The Russians ended up coming back and taking over, but for a minute it looked like the spirit of that hockey victory was going to take over in the country. So the Olympic Village doesn't have much left today. A lot of it's run down and just abandoned. So if you're in Berlin, you may want to check it out. And if you do, you can see the little apartment where Jesse Owens stayed with all the other people. And just imagine what the talk was like at night as these athletes chatted with each other. How about the Olympic Stadium? What to do with that? Well, it's still there. It's the home court for some German athletes. It does have a cool roof on the top. And it does have the original pillars from when it opened, but the swastikas have been removed. But it does have that look and feel, doesn't it, of that architecture in Germany of the 1930s. So the next time you're in Chicago, you may want to go to Oakwood Cemetery and see Jesse Owens' grave. Reflect on his athletic accomplishments and how he was a living rebuke of Nazi ideology.